What is the single most effective piece of financial advice you've ever received? Story 1. I still remember the moment when I plunged into the depths of my finances. Until then, I had always been rather careless with money. I would buy the most advanced electronics, the stylishest garments, or anything else that appeared interesting at the moment in time. It was not rare for me to impulsively buy things that were completely unnecessary simply because they were awesome. One day I was pondering about purchasing a brand new smartphone. I had been waiting for this smart gadget for a couple of weeks now, and almost ordered it when a call came in. My friend, who was way better with money than I, answered. I told her about my joy concerning the new device, and she couldn't help got back to me saying, "Is it really a must-have, or is it going to sit idle for a year?" I was quick to shrug this off, but the more I mulled over it, the more it struck me how many times did I actually fall for this. So many stupid devices and other things I have knee-deep in, have spent money on, and they just sit collecting dust. I even had a box filled with wonderful things that at a point I was sure I would not manage without only to completely forget about them after some months. That one simple question shifted my perspective. I understood this statement once I had the annoying realization that if there is an emotion that comes with buying something, it can, however, not be for free. I also began to think about the same question each time I felt like making a big purchase from then on. Do I need this, or is it going to be useless? It altered how I viewed the concept of spending. That even saved quite a considerable amount of money that I redirected to more useful things, like investing or saving. I oriented my thought processes only on the activities that helped me achieve my desires in the long run, as opposed to the activities that provided gratification in the short run. It might not be that an easy task to deny oneself the enjoyment of what is readily available, and that question always helps me to make better decisions. Story 2. My father was the one who provided me with the best financial advice that I have cherished to date. What he told me was, always pay your credit card bill on time, and for the entire amount due every month. I was still in college then, and like many students, I thought having a credit card implied that I could spend as I pleased. I used it every time, for purchase of food and clothing, clubbing, and many others, and while always telling myself that I would pay the debt off later on. But then I think it was last summer that one day I checked my statement, and my credit card bill was enormous. The interest was outrageous, and all I made was a payment towards the balance. And this was the moment when I fully understood my father's advice. I had no clue as to how quickly one can get into a slippery slope, especially with the use of credit card. One can incur a lot of interest, and before long, I was making payments that were retarding me from ever moving forward instead of the other way round. That's when I decided that I should break the habit. From that moment on, every month without fail, I paid off my credit card balance in full. No matter how little money I had, I did not allow myself to incur any debt. It was admittedly difficult at times, particularly during those months where, needless to say, I nearly starved to pay the entire bill off. But the satisfaction of knowing I wasn't incurring any interest was worth any minor discomforts I may have had to face. Gradually, I understood the importance of what I was doing. The reports reflected the increasing creditworthiness on my profile, and I could seek for more favorable loan and credit offers. And most importantly, I understood that there was a certain tranquility that was afforded by paying the balance on my credit card. I was not wasting money by keeping paying interest, and I was not worried about having debt. That has helped me stay out of debt, and that is why I tell that to every friend of mine. It is uncomplicated, but it has turned out to be the best financial choice I have ever made in my life. Story 3. One of the most valuable pieces of financial advice that I've been given came from an older colleague who told me, document every expense you incur. Initially, I considered it to be boring and pointless. After all, I was quite well acquainted with how much money I was spending, right? I settled my bills, shopped for food, and went out for a drink or two once in a while. But there was something so relevant in what she was saying that I decided to give it a shot. I sought a small notebook and began to scribble down every single cent spent, regardless of how trivial. After several weeks, my astonishment knew no bounds. It is not the high-priced items like the rent or the huge bills that got me, but rather the little things, like getting an additional cup of coffee while heading to the office, or ordering food in instead of cooking. When I saw it all compiled, I noticed those trivial and innocent-looking expenses actually came to several hundreds of dollars in a month. How ridiculous! All of a sudden, I was aware that it was very possible to lose track of my expenses if I ever neglected the minor aspects. But the main alteration occurred when I began to apply this knowledge in order to improve my decisions. I did not think about the importance of escapism in one's life. Rather, it was just so much more concerning controlling behaviors. I started to give up the extra coffee or heat food at home instead, and it wasn't long before I was being discreetly economical. The biggest transformation, however, was with regards to my thinking. Making an expenditure balance made me understand that there was no need to omit completely most of the things in life that one enjoys. A little more prudentiality towards the management of money went a long way in such cases. That practice has changed completely how I approach finances. I have been the ability to save more money, manage my expenditures wisely, and for the first time, be in control of my finances. Story 4. My recollection of my first job interview, for which I had wished to win the position, is still fresh. I remember preparing for that moment, hell-bent on impressing the interviewers. I had done my homework on the corporation, rehearsed my replies, and was assured of winning the battle, almost everything. Except for one thing, the salary issue. I felt uneasy because I was unsure of what salary to ask for. If I said the figure first, then I feared either I would put too low a figure or be considered high maintenance. It is then that one of my mentors quoted this famous line that I will never forget. The one who names the salary number first is the loser in the negotiation. I have to admit that I did not understand for what they SD that, but in the course of the interview everything became clear. When the question, "What salary do you expect?" was posed to me by the interviewer, there was no panic on my side. Instead of jumping in with a number, I recalled what my mentor taught me. I calmly said, "I would be interested to know the figure you have in mind for the position." There was a pause, and after some time, the interviewer indicated a wage range which was surprisingly above my expectations. I was in shock. Not only had I managed to avoid quoting a low amount, but I had also managed to receive a number that was reasonable and even above my expectations. That moment gave me an important lesson. Sometimes if the negotiation is turned into a question of when and how much one should remain quiet, then that is the best strategy to adopt. By sitting back and letting the other party put a figure on my worth first, they were surprised by me. It was effectively creating an environment in which someone let you win. That's a general trait of a doormat, which most of the people view it as weakness. However, that piece of advice has been the most beneficial money-making tactic that I have ever employed, and it is something that I take into any negotiation, whether it is a big deal or a small one. Story 5. I recollect the moment when I was first told, "Spend less than you earn as if it is fresh." It was my grandfather who said that because he lived through the Great Depression. I was in my 20s and just out of college, and living from one paycheck to another without thinking of the next. I used to rationalize spending on some small luxuries, such as going for dinner or buying new gadgets, and I would say that I would compensate that next month, or that I deserved it after a hard week's work. However, everything changed when my grandfather told me those words. He was not saying that I should stop enjoying myself or lead a miserable life. He was focusing on the need for one to be prudent with their finances. It appeared too obvious, almost so elementary as to be revolutionary, but the more I paid attention to it, the more it struck me. I came to the harsh realization that I had no strategy, no money kept aside, nor any backup plan for unforeseen events. I was going to change. As such, I began noting my expenditure with the aim of curtailing expenses on things like daily coffee runs and wasted subscriptions. But the most challenging aspect was changing my mindset, understanding that saving was not about deprivation, but securing one's safety. It was not simple, especially since some of my friends encouraged me to treat myself. However, after some time, I started understanding the reasons why. I saved enough money for an emergency fund, began to save money regularly, and even started investing money. Gradually, those minor amendments graduated into major transformations. Currently, I do not fear any bills or emergencies. That piece of advice was fundamentally helpful not only in getting my financial situation in order, it helped me regain control over my life and future uncertainty. For as long as I live, I know this will stick with me. Story 6. The most valuable advice on finances I have ever received was from a very close friend of mine whose life has not always been a bed of roses. I remember one evening we were talking and he said, "Do not turn your house into an ATM." For some reason, I failed to get his point at that time. I was in my 20s and just starting out, so the thought of using a portion of my home's value to access cash was an enticing idea. I thought to myself that a small loan could be helpful, better still a car or a holiday, something that would make life more bearable. But then he started talking about his family. His parents, he revealed, had gotten a second mortgage to buy them fancy a boat, which eventually led them into heavy debt. The boat did not last long in terms of giving them happiness, and contributed more to the strain of debt with additional mortgage payments. Eventually, they defaulted, yet had to deal with hardships including, for instance, reducing spending on leisure activities, as well as the postponement of any work on the house that would have risen costs. The pressure he spoke of that was put on his kin demonstrated to me just how risky undertaking such a practice as using your house as collateral for useless assets could be. It sounds like free money, and it is indeed true. People take the risk. It was then that I made a pledge never to commit that error. Instead, I sought to save more and cut back on my expenses rather than trying to circumvent the process. It was not at all effortless, but I regarded my house as an asset that would be liquidated only in the long run. And here I am, many years later, after having vanquished my mortgage and charging that coming to total financial independence is the result of reasoned and careful choices, and not on money taken out of home equity for needless temporary extravagances. Story 7. In the early stages of my entrepreneurial journey, I found it difficult to manage my personal life in relation to work. I was preoccupied by relationships, social gatherings, and other activities that appeared useful, but at the end of the day were counterproductive. One day I spoke to an elder who had built and lost empires. Seeking his advice, he said, "That is the problem if you wish to progress. Too many distractions around you. Think about how to make more money pursuing activities that are of value and stop any activities that do not promote your success." I first found it brutal, but the more I pondered, the more accurate I found it to be. I had allowed myself to be encumbered by things that were in no way taking me closer to my objectives. I took his warning seriously and resolved to eliminate the distractions. I also wouldn't waste so many hours on social networks and trying to win over every person. Rather, I began to invest most of my time in what actually occupied me, growing my business and developing myself. In the initial stages, it was hard. There was a sense of deprivation since I was denying myself several enjoyable activities, but I remained steadfast to the plan. Little by little, my concentration bore fruit. My output increased tremendously, and I began to experience business in the real sense. Clients were streaming in, contracts were getting signed, and I was carving a niche as a go-getter, trustworthy and dependable. That advice did not simply help me to learn the ways of making profits. It also taught me how to decide on which goals to pursue and how to shape my fate. By focusing on what is important and blocking the rest, I changed the way I thought, and that ensured that I would indeed succeed many years to come. Story 8. The most valuable financial advice I ever received was from a longtime friend of mine who was into finance. It was about the petty cash, which we always ignore. Every day I used to visit the coffee shop on my way to work without realizing why it is an indulgent habit. $5 a day is not that serious, right? But one day my friend happened to draw my attention to those insignificant costs that make a lot of difference in the long run. That $5 a day, he pointed, becomes nearly $2,000 in a year. I was hesitant from the very beginning to accept it. It sounded like an exaggeration, but when I actually sat down and calculated it, I understood. $5 did not seem so much yet when multiplied by 365 days. It is a huge amount of money. And it was not only about the coffee. All those different little things started to bother me. Having lunch at the office, buying anything from a vending machine, those small things easy to purchase here and there which in the end gathered a large amount. And all of a sudden I found that I was additionally wasting a significant sum on those trifles that I did not bother regarding even once. My friend clarified that the point was not about erasing every other fun activity. It was about gaining control over my spending, wherein I would be conscious of how my cash would be flowing. He advised me to start by reducing it slightly, for instance, brewing coffee at home rather than frequenting the coffee shop every day. In the beginning it was hard to abandon the routine of morning coffee, but as I continued to do so, I understood its importance more and more. So I wasn't spending $5 every single day. I was saving, and even better, saving apart for investment. That minor adjustment has proven quite promising in the long run. For now, I do not feel like I am depriving myself of anything, while I am sure that other core issues will grant me greater financial liberty. It is one of those obvious pieces of wisdom that everyone knows, but they, in my case, have been retained memory plus i.e. attitude change. Story 9. The best financial advice I ever received was when my dad introduced me to the notion of money, a leisure I know most dads do not. It could have been a Saturday or a Sunday for that matter, when he must have noticed me all dressed up, looking quite sophisticated, with a plastic handbag bought for me in a local store decoration. Then, he said, "Every time you go to buy something on credit, ask yourself this: can you drive it or live in it? If you can't, don't bother," he continued. Not every single bit of it, though. Understandable, that is. I mean, everyone was busy flashing their cards, making necessary purchases for the most recent tech advancements in gadgets, or jet-setting on business-class trips, so borrowing seems like the most casual option ever. I wanted to fit in her mentality for a second, but my father's words held me back. In the course of time, however, I began to appreciate why he was against it. It was not only about automobile and real estate purchase. It was about how to spend your money for the best investment for years to come. He was alerting me on the danger of squandering money on items that would be worthless the instant I walked out of the store. Then it hit me. Using credit cards was just paying for it later, with interest, which also included depreciable items. Then I made changes. I began to care less about fashion, employing more of my time and resources to studying what was actually worth my expenditure. Rather than buying non-useful things which I knew would not last a year, I started setting money aside to pay the deposit for a house and putting my money into investment vehicles such as stock and bond markets. Little by little, my perspective towards finances changed. I was taught how to be frugal, but not tortured by the wear and tear of daily life using my own earned income, and such seemingly little things compounded over the years. It has changed everything about my current financial management, and all the gratitude goes to that one simple but crucial advice I received. Story 10. A few years back I was caught in the cycle where I spent several hundreds on gadgets every few months, upgrading the TV, buying the newest gaming console, and whatever else I felt was worth purchasing. In the beginning, it seemed to be so great as if this was the life one wanted to live. However, as time passed by, I began to realize that the problem with such purchases was not as much as expected. They lost their sparkle and glitz sooner than I presumed, and before I realized it, I was living among excesses. Then one day, a friend nonchalantly said something that really stuck with me. If you can't afford it twice, don't buy it. On the first instance, I simply dismissed the comment. However, in the course of time, it became entrenched in me. I understood that there were many purchases I made, like the newest TV or a gaming system, which were not essential, making the purchase at the very least. They were not beneficial in enhancing the quality of life in the long run. I was buying things that I would have a problem with replacing or keeping in good condition. From that moment, I made a resolve to abide by that piece of counsel. Now, if I ever consider the purchase of an item, I will ask myself, could I buy that again without any stress attached to it? If the answer is negative, I leave that item. It is not about robbing myself from enjoyment from nice and interesting things, but it is about being more rational regarding one's finances. Eventually, I came to understand that the real aspects which I appreciate in life were not the new stylish technological equipment, but those over which money could be spent without strain either on sights or companionship or myself. That, however, was clearer than me how to understand spending money. It has made me more focused in the things that matter, and in the process helped me curb a lot of unnecessary expenditure. Story 11. As I was about to start packing for college, my folks rendered me a piece of advice that will be with me for quite some time. If you don't have it, don't spend it. Back then, I thought it was a bit too obvious and possibly even too naive. Spending money one does not possess. Is there someone who does not know this? Spoiler alert! I had no idea how valuable this piece of advice would turn out to be without much effort, as the concerns of social acceptance weighed heavily on my shoulders. College can be pricey, and everyone appears to be purchasing every new technology, outfit, and going out for meals all the time. One easily becomes engrossed in the must-haves and loses the perception of the importance of needs over wants. I remember buying a load of textbooks at a college bookstore and almost swiping the credit card when my parents' words began to play at the back of my mind. I did not swipe the card, but rather took a moment, assessed which books were available to purchase second-hand, and saved hundreds. This straightforward principle helped me survive the years when credit cards and loans were everywhere, and there was a strong desire to spend beyond one's means. And it was not just about refraining from making purchases with money I don't have. It was about understanding self-control and discipline in carrying out financial activities. That particular recommendation impacted the perception of my spending habits well after leaving the university, and even till today, it manages to keep me in check.